very much for coming. I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad I get the opportunity to talk to you about some of these topics. Let me just dive right in. I want to mention, first of all, that there is a literature on management, of course. There are a lot of books out there, a lot of articles. There are entire journals dedicated to this sort of thing. And the only problem with them, from my point of view, is that their intended audience tends to be people in management. People who want to become managers or rise through the ranks or manage a lot of people effectively, affect change, things like that. There's almost nothing written that's intended for the person in the working in the field who doesn't really have any intention to become a manager. Someone who just wants to do their job and still has to deal with hierarchical systems on a regular basis. So I want to talk about that part of it. I want to talk about, as I call it, winning the game of business from the employee side rather than from the manager's side. I want to talk about that type of situation. Now, one thing, my contact information is here. I am going to give these slides to the organizers, so they will be available. I'm not sure exactly how, but Patrick will take care of all that. My name is Ken Kousen, actually. It's pronounced like the relative. We think it's an Ellis Island job, Nobody knows what it was in the old country. My company is Kousen IT Incorporated. Of course, I say Kousen IT. My wife says Cousin It, like the Addams Family. It was her idea. I'm the author of a book called Making Java Groovy, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about now, so I'm going to move on. But there's an email address, there's my Twitter handle. Feel free to contact me whenever you like. Great managers are people that you want to work with and are very helpful. What do? How do we know we have a great manager? It's not that they control everything we're doing. In fact, great managers tend to protect you from distractions. They go out of their way to make it so that you have time and space and freedom to do your job rather than having to worry about the chaos going on in any hierarchical organization. There are many, many meetings that occur inside of an organization that will ultimately affect us, affect our lives, but that we have no power or influence over. And therefore, we don't really want to go there. We just want to know about what happened. And a good manager will go to those meetings for you, will let you know what you need to know, and will keep you away from the things that are just distractions. A great manager will get you the resources you need. If it turns out you need additional software, or you need better hardware, or you need more powerful net access, or a cloud solution, or whatever, a great manager will find the resources and find ways to get you what you need when you need it. That includes hiring, that includes organizational stuff. They go to bat for you when you need that help. Finally, another thing that great managers do is they're very helpful when problems arise. I've spent many years in what I'm going to just label overall as a hierarchical organization. When I refer to a hierarchical organization, I mean a company where there are people who are managers and they have control over your career, promotions and salary and responsibilities and things like that. So I'm trying to draw a distinction between people in that role and people who are, say, technical leads. The goal of a technical leader is similar to our goals. It's to focus on the project and help you make sure that you can get the project accomplished so that everybody can work together. The goal of a manager is to be a manager, is to rise up into ultimately the so-called C-level executive ranks, CTO, CFO, CIO, CEO, that sort of thing. And they are focused much more on making the organization run and even more importantly than that, making money for the company, as opposed to what we're doing. Well, if you're in a hierarchical organization and you get into a conflict with another group, and it could be a mild conflict, like we both want to work on the same project at the same time and how we're going to divide responsibilities, or it could be a major conflict with one department taking over a responsibility that you want to be involved in, something like that. One thing that seems to be the case is that if you don't have an ally at a high enough level in a battle like that, you're completely outmatched. I mean, as technical people, we definitely have value to the company, but if you're in a conflict with a higher level manager in a different division, you need a manager on your side as well, just to get you in the room, just to help you make the argument. So the managerial role does play very valuable managers do play a very valuable role for us, and we do really need them, despite the fact that they can be quite annoying at times and difficult. So great managers will also help you when problems arise. Working for a great manager is easy. Everybody wants to work for a great manager. And sometime, who knows, in your career you may get that opportunity. If you get it more than once, so much the better. But the problem is that it rarely seems to happen that way. We rarely get great management managing our projects or our job responsibilities or anything. So one of the questions is, well, why not? Why does it work out like that? Well, one of the key things to notice is that we're the technical ranks, and therefore we generally have very limited, if any, managerial responsibilities. And that means the people we report to tend to be the lowest rung on the managerial scale. On the management ladder, these are not the experts. These are not the really accomplished people. These are the ones that either got promoted from the technical ranks and are trying to figure this out now on the fly, or have just entered into management and therefore haven't done it a lot and haven't accomplished a lot. We're talking about the least experienced of all the managers in the organization and the least proficient at doing the job. So it's probably not at all a surprise that they aren't necessarily very good at it. They tend to make a lot of mistakes. They don't know how to go about these things. It can be very frustrating, but we're dealing with what are either rookies or people who have been in the job a long time, and that's not necessarily a good thing. If they were good at it, if they were proficient, they'd either move up or they'd move on. They'd look for other opportunities. So if your manager isn't that great, what do we do about it? How do we deal with that situation? Pardon me. One thing to notice, one thing is to realize that the manager's job is not our job. They do different things than we do. They are measured differently than we are. They are evaluated differently. Their incentives are different from what ours are. And we need to appreciate what sorts of pressures they're under in order to know how to deal with them effectively. Because their priorities are going to be different from our priorities. I read an article a while ago about a longtime actor who eventually became a director. And this article was about his experience as a director for the first time. Now, the guy was quite accomplished, and I'm not trying to hide the name, I just don't have to remember it offhand, but he was very experienced as an actor, and therefore the other actors on the set who knew him in that role wanted to have actor types of discussions. They wanted to talk about motivation, they wanted to talk about backstory, they wanted to talk about how to set up a scene in particular ways, all this kind of stuff. And as a longtime successful actor, he loved those discussions. He wanted to have those discussions. And he thought that was great. But as a new manager, as someone who's directing, he always had a little voice in the back of his head going, we're losing the light. I'm going to have to pay the crew overtime. We have a schedule we're going to have to meet. We have to get the dailies out. All these additional different responsibilities that were related to what the actors were doing, but fundamentally different on a basic level. When you talk to managers, when you sit down and discuss their lives with them, what you find out is that in a manager's world, the primary consideration is money. Now, of course, we all are motivated by money to some degree. I mean, we're always interested in some rewards for what we're doing, and of course, we're all, desperately undervalued. I mean, I know that. But when you talk to a manager, we're not talking about motivation in terms of salary, okay? Everybody wants more salary and more resources. Instead, managers are more focused on money for the company. They want the company to be profitable. They want to be able to make the company compete, and not as much concerned about individual resources within the company, individual rewards for people. Now, obviously, they want the rewards as well, but their motivation, the thing they're being evaluated on in many cases, is money. And the thing is while that may not seem that obvious when we're talking to our direct manager, the higher up you go in the company, the more important money becomes as a consideration. I have a friend who used to be a vice president in a Fortune 50 company. He was a vice president of one of the major divisions of that company. And he had an engineering background. He is one of the people that had risen through the ranks originally in engineering and then eventually moved into management and was quite successful, moved up the ranks. And he explained to me once that if a technical problem reached his level, so that something seriously had to be done, then they would go into a room and they would have all the relevant players there, and they would have a long discussion that never once really touched on the technical details of the problem. It was always, what do I need to spend to deal with this problem? What do I need to spend to make it go away? What do I need to acquire in terms of resources to ultimately fix it? What do I need to do in terms of reorganization? It was always ultimately about money and resources. And then, once the decisions had been made, they could sit down and go, well, by the way, you want to know what actually happened? And have the technical discussion at that point. And it's just very interesting as technical people to know that's happening, because we generally don't think that way. We did not enter this profession because we wanted to make an extra dollar for the company necessarily. We want to focus on the technical problem. And of course that always seems so much more pure and honorable that we wind up demonstrating what could only be called something of a measure of contempt, if you will, or at least, devaluing the other functions in the company, marketing, sales, even human resources, things that just tend to get in our way and are focused on money for the company and not on making it work right, doing the proper thing and making it elegant and beautiful and all of that. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's just a characteristic. And when you're dealing with a manager, it's worth keeping in mind that in the back of the manager's mind is this constant refrain of money, money, money. How do I make this go away? What's it going to cost me in terms of time and schedule and resources and budget? Now, that means we have an agenda, and the manager, whoever you're dealing with, also has an agenda. And of course, they don't match exactly. Now, this can be very frustrating, because what we try to do is we try to operate in the overlap, of course. We want to be where everything works together, where what the manager wants and what we want are commensurate, are very helpful. The problem is that these situations also come up. We do wind up with situations where the manager is going to make a decision that will be something we don't like, or in reality, we'll make a decision the manager's not going to terribly like either. And the key is to be able to build a relationship that can handle those situations. Let me make a movie analogy. How many people have seen the Caine Mutiny? Small number of hands. The rest of you are in for a treat. It's a phenomenal movie. It's wonderful, okay? It's an absolute classic, and I'm going to spoil part of it for you. But not badly. I mean, every time that movie comes on, I watch it anyway. Now, the star of the movie is Humphrey Bogart, but this is not the Humphrey Bogart from Sam Spade, Spade and Archer. This is not Rick from Casablanca. This is Captain Queeg. Captain Queeg takes over a destroyer in the U.S. Navy during World War II. It's a beat-up old ship. The crew is very experienced, but they're tired, they're beaten down. And Queeg takes over, and he is a mess. He is a mass of insecurities. He spouts off cliches all the time. He is definitely battle-weary himself, but he's very officious, and he causes all kinds of problems right away. He'll make statements like, there's 4 ways to do any problem. There's the right way, the wrong way, the Navy way, and my way. You do things my way, we'll get along. That sort of discussion. And of course, that's going to immediately alienate everybody, and he does. And through a long set of circumstances, eventually he loses the crew entirely. They make up songs about him. It's a real problem. And then they wind up in a typhoon. The entire carrier group is in the Pacific, winds up in a typhoon. And during this typhoon, Queeg freezes. He can't make a decision. He can't do anything. And the executive officer feels obligated to relieve the captain of his duties, to make a mutiny and take over, and he saves the ship. And it works out, except, of course, then there has to be a trial, because there's no legal way to do that that's going to have no consequences at all. So, of course, there's a trial, and the defense attorney is played by Jose Ferrer. Wonderful role for him, by the way. Excellent part. And what ultimately happens is that the attorney puts Queeg on the stand, even though Queeg is not the one under trial here, and manages to put enough pressure on him that eventually he cracks, and all the line officers doing the court-martial see that, yes, okay, it's not the way they described. This guy really is a mess. I can see how things could get chaotic, and everybody goes free. It all looks great. Now, if you watch the movie to that point, it's a very good movie. It's very enjoyable. It's a lot of fun. But the next and last scene is what makes it a classic. The officers of the cane are happy in celebration. They're having a party, and in comes the defense attorney, and he is drunk out of his mind, and he's angry. And he is furious with the officers of the cane. He's like, look, Queeg couldn't help himself. He's a sick man. We established that. But you're all real healthy. If you had given Queeg the loyalty he needed, do you suppose the whole issue would have come up during the typhoon? When the typhoon is going on is not the time to establish a relationship. That's the time to rely on an existing one. Now, of course, in our lives, we rarely are in situations that are life and death like that are nearly so extreme. But for us, the typhoon is, there's a merger or acquisition type thing going on, and it's going to change our job dramatically. Or there could possibly be layoffs or something like that. Or it could even be as simple as, hey, we just got the opportunity to do this major new project. I want to be in on that. I want to lead that effort. I want to be involved in the responsibilities there. That's our typhoon, where we actually are in the situation where we need to rely on the relationship rather than establish it in the first place. I mention that word loyalty for a reason. This was something that was a surprise to me when I was in the business world for many years, especially early on, is that we tend to think in terms of metrics. And businesses love to think in terms of metrics as well. How do we measure this, that, and the other? Because that way we can tune what we do in order to more correctly produce what we need, ultimately money for the company. The problem with management is an extremely difficult thing to measure. I worked for 12 years for a company that was a Fortune 50 company. And I can tell you that in all 12 years, I never saw a failed project, not one. Now, that's ridiculous. Projects failed all the time, every year. But there was always a way to play it. There was always a way to describe it, to show how we learned something valuable, how we were able to make progress in this particular area. So if you're looking at saying, well, how do I judge a manager? Just meeting objectives and staying under budget is often not helpful at all, because there's always a way to describe the effort as a success. And this is a problem. So managers tend to value loyalty as a replacement for some finite metric. Now, we see this in businesses. If a new manager comes into a business at a relatively high level, what's the first thing he or she does? They bring in all their own people. Is it because their people are better than the ones in existence, the ones that are already there? Demonstrably, no. Not necessarily at all. But the new people will be loyal to the new manager. They'll have their back, as they say. They will make sure that this person succeeds with every effort they can make. And loyalty is prized above all by managers. Slight exaggeration, but still basically true. So the key is for us as technical people to find a way to demonstrate what I like to call constructive loyalty or active loyalty, and yet still not feel like we're selling out or just rolling over for whatever they want to do. We need to be able to maintain our sense of integrity and our values as well, and yet still build the relationship in a way that the manager will value it and be willing to work with you when the time comes. So again, this is an attempt and effort, and I'm going to give you some concrete examples and pieces of advice on how to build this loyalty relationship without having to sacrifice yourself in any way, hopefully. One of the things we also have to notice about our managers, they live in fear most of the time. Because, well, what's the problem? The technical experts, us, are far more valued by the organization than the first rung of management. Okay, the technical experts are hard to find and hard to develop. And once they're there, they've got skills that are hard to replace as well. Whereas the first level of management, you can always find another manager, seemingly. Now, truth, there's good and there's bad, and it's not so easy to fill that either. But nevertheless, these managers at the first rung that are inexperienced and not very proficient, they also tend to know they're not great. Now, not all of them do, obviously, and the ones who think they're wonderful and are terrible definitely happen. I can't deal with all the truly dysfunctional situations, but most people who aren't doing a great job tend to be aware they're not doing a great job. Now, this is particularly true, by the way, of technical individuals who've been promoted into management because they know what good looks like because they were good at the technical job. And now they're just going to do a new job that is so fundamentally different from what they're used to that they're uncomfortable and they know it's difficult and awkward. They also know at that first level that they're the first rung to be eliminated. If we ever say we've got to get rid of some people, it's not the technical people that are getting laid off. It's the first rung of management because, oh, wow, we could need to flatten the organization a bit, make it more agile, responsive, all the motherhood and apple pie words that lead to them getting laid off. And they know this. So again, they're going to value loyalty very highly because they know their job is far more at risk than ours. Okay, another movie analogy. You ever see Private Benjamin? Yeah, don't go out of your way. Okay. I'd like to think this is like half of a good movie. You know, like the first hour is pretty enjoyable, and then I generally change the channel. This movie is from Goldie Hawn's transitional phase in her career, where before this movie she used to play a lot of what even she described as ditzy blonde type of characters. If you ever saw Foul Play, for example, where she was very clueless about everything, and changed in her career to playing strong, powerful women who had control of their lives and did great things. In this movie, she does both. She starts off helpless and completely unaware of everything going on around her. And it's a silly movie. By a set of ridiculous circumstances, she winds up enlisting in the Army. Now, in the Army, her manager, if you will, is this captain here, played by the late Eileen Brennan. Does a wonderful job. And this captain, by the way, is not a great manager, doesn't do a great job, and their relationship collapses from the very beginning. You know, it's a mess. And, of course, this is a Goldie Hawn coming-of-age movie, so after it finally hits bottom, Goldie Hawn decides, no, I'm going to make this work, and she straightens up and she becomes a good soldier and working very hard. Now, what eventually happens is that the company goes on maneuvers. They're going into war games, actually. Red team versus a blue team. And Goldie Hawn and her buddies go up to the captain and say, okay, what's our responsibility? They're all ready. They're on the bounce. They want to go win, beat the world there. And the captain looks at them and says, oh, you four, you guard the swamp. The message being, I'm going to get you all out of the way where you can't cause any trouble. And if it's unpleasant for you, so much the better. As I say, not a great manager. Now, this being a Goldie Hawn movie, they go looking for the swamp, they get lost, they stumble across the enemy encampment, they take them by surprise, take over the whole enemy team, and now are marching back to their headquarters. The captain sees the entire opposing team coming at her and radios to the colonel that she's going to need to surrender. I mean, the overwhelming force coming over there. And the colonel radios Goldie Hawn and says, so do you accept their surrender? And she says, no, we're them. And of course, the colonel lands and he berates the captain. Don't be so quick to surrender next time, and goes over to praise Goldie Hawn. Now, this is a B movie at best, okay? But this was the magic moment. This was the opportunity. All Goldie Hawn had to say at this point, all she had to say was, wait, the captain had no idea it was us. There was no way she could know. We were under orders, radio silence, whatever. She put us on this detached duty, which had a very low probability of success, but ultimately she bore the responsibility. She put us in the right place at the right time where we could succeed like this. She deserves credit too. Now, of course, she didn't say that, and the whole relationship collapsed. But all you have to do is say that, and suddenly everything would have been back to being a good relationship again. Show the active loyalty. Part of our job is to make our managers look good to his or her manager. Violate this at your peril. While loyalty may not get rewarded or may take an awfully long time to get rewarded, a lack of loyalty is felt immediately. They can tell, they can feel it, that the disconnect is there, and it's a problem. Now, one of the problems we have with this particular principle is that in most cases, the manager can't do what we do. We're talking about someone who doesn't have the technical skills to do the job that we just accomplished. Why should they get all the credit when we're the ones who did the work? Now, I have another friend. She worked for a town in Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut, actually, myself. Eastern, not Western. Think Red Sox, not Yankees. It's very important. At any rate, she had an idea to help save the town a lot of money. So she went to her boss and she asked for resources and time to go put this plan into place. And he said, hey, that's a good idea, go ahead and do it. And she went and she did all the research and she did all the implementations, and it was very successful. It streamlined, I think it was voting registration she was doing, made a huge difference and saved the town a lot of money. So then she went back to her boss and said, okay, I would now like to go to the town council at the next meeting and tell them about what we did. I'd like to present it. And then he said to her, I already did that. In other words, he already took all the responsibility, all the credit for her work. And sound familiar? Now, her initial reaction would be the same reaction any of us would have, is, hey, wait a minute, that's not fair. I'm not giving this idiot another idea ever. Hang on to that one. I will come back to it. I want to bring up a book. This book is called The Evolution of Cooperation. It's by Robert Axelrod. This is the revised edition, but this thing has been through many, many, many printings. I think this is a picture of the 2009 version. Robert Axelrod was studying game theory, this sort of managerial process, and he talked about a game called The Prisoner's Dilemma. Now, many of you have no doubt heard of the prisoner's dilemma. The idea behind the prisoner's dilemma is that two prisoners are captured for the same crime, and the police try to get one to turn on the other. If they both cooperate, they both stay silent, they cooperate with each other, each serves 1 year. If one defects, turns on the other prisoner, but the other one cooperates, then the one who defected goes free and the other one gets 3 years. That's symmetric, either side. And if they both defect, if they both turn on each other, they each get 2 years. Now, the absolute numbers don't matter, but the inequality does. Okay, the relationship does. Now, this prisoner's dilemma problem has been studied for years and years. What was interesting about what Axelrod did is that he did something called an iterated prisoner's dilemma. The idea of having a computer tournament where programs would have a strategy for playing the prisoner's dilemma, and they would play it over and over and over again. Now, this is computer tournaments in the 70s, so we're talking BASIC, we're talking Fortran, talking big mainframes, very expensive, very difficult to do. Nevertheless, he invited people from various departments, from economics, from statistics, from psychology, from wherever, to all submit programs to this tournament, and they would all play a round robin where they'd play each other a few hundred times, and they'd see what happened. What was very interesting is the tournament was won by a program called Tit for Tat. That program consisted of 4 lines of BASIC. The entire strategy was cooperate on the first move, and then on each succeeding move, do whatever your opponent did. So if you cooperate on the first move, and then the opponent also cooperates, you cooperate again. If the opponent defects, you defect, but then if they cooperate on the move after that, you cooperate again. See? And this little simple program won the entire tournament. And then he said, wow, that's amazing. We're going to study this, but a year from now we're going to have another tournament. We'll invite more people, and by the way, Tit for Tat will definitely be in that tournament as well, so plan for it. And they did. They had another tournament a year later, and Tit for Tat won again. It turns out it's a mathematically stable solution to this problem. What's the lesson from Tit for Tat? And I'm going to talk about that. Cooperation, and of course to win that tournament there has to be a lot of cooperation. Cooperation can emerge naturally as long as both sides remember you're going to do this again and again and again and again. The strategy you take when you're only going to interact with somebody once is very different from the strategy you take when it's going to be a long-term interaction over and over and over again. A classic example that's discussed in the book is about the live and let live strategy that emerged in World War I on the trenches. Live and let live actually comes from trench warfare in World War I. What happened is you have 2 opposing armies dug in one of the most miserable existences imaginable. And ultimately what happened, it started with the sides being resupplied. If one side noticed the other was getting new food shipments, they would not attack and not fire during that time. And the idea is that the other side would then not fire when they were being resupplied. And this cooperation that emerged grew and grew and grew to the point where there's stories of a German army officer giving a tour to a new recruit at the front saying, you see that building right over there, that tower? In about 10 minutes, that's going to get hit with a mortar, so we have to be over here. And it would. so that way they could look like they were fighting and a lot of material was destroyed, but there were no casualties, see? And of course the generals were incensed. You're never supposed to cooperate with the enemy under any circumstances, so they hated it and they tried to break it. And ultimately it was broken by a variety of things, including the fact that they no longer measured material anymore, they measured casualties, and you can't fake a casualty. Okay, that was the difficult thing. Also tanks came along, technological innovation. But cooperation emerged in the most hostile environment imaginable. Now, by the way, cooperation is not always a good thing emerging. We saw lawsuits in the last couple of years in Silicon Valley because each of the major players out there, Google, Amazon, Apple, several of the others, refused to hire each other's employees. Poaching, they called it. There's an actual email that came out of that trial from Steve Jobs being extremely furious at Eric Schmidt at Google, saying, you hired one of our people, and Eric Schmidt's response was to apologize, no less. Now, this is anti-competitive, this is collusion, but once again, it's cooperation in a highly competitive environment, where as soon as there's a problem, the other side's going to retaliate. See, there's the success of tit for tat. It succeeds because it favors cooperation. Ultimately, cooperation is a winning strategy in this. It's better to work together. It never defects first. Every strategy that tried defecting first came in behind this. It retaliates immediately. It doesn't wait 6 months going, remember back then when you messed this thing up and I was so mad? No, it retaliates right away, but it forgives right away too. That's the combination that's very effective. Now, we need to find a way to apply this sort of thing to our interactions with management that doesn't violate the constructive loyalty principle and still gets across the fact that you're unhappy or happy, whatever it may be. The retaliation part is necessary, but it doesn't have to be symmetrical. You don't have to call out your manager in a public forum or trash them on social media. I mean, that's a real rookie error. Obviously, we don't want to do that. But for most people, and I include managers in that category most of the time, if you go in their office and you shut the door and you say, look, I'm just not happy about this situation, that's retaliation. That's enough. That's a very stressful situation, even for most managers. Wow, what happened? What can we do? And then if you follow that up with forgiveness, with, okay, we're good now, there's the win. Then you've built the loyalty, you've built the relationship. It can be very subtle in the retaliation, but it has to be private so that the manager believes, I still got your back. I can still take care of you. You'll be all right. In public, you go and voice your displeasure privately. You negotiate, and then you let it go. In the story of my friend, the woman who had her responsibilities, or rather her accomplishments, were taken credit by the manager, where the manager took credit for her accomplishments, what she ultimately did is she went into his office and she said, I'm not happy about this. Look, I understand you had responsibility for the project. I understand that it was your budget and time and everything. That's fine. But I should get some reward too. Maybe time off, maybe money. What they ultimately decided on and what she ultimately wanted was she got freedom to choose her next couple of projects and whatever budget she needed in order to go do them. Because if he has any sense at all, he wants to keep her happy too. She's the one who came up with the idea. Now, if you're worried that, hey, if my manager gets credit for my idea, I'm not going to get anywhere, nobody's going to know I did this, here's the thing. If the manager doesn't reward you, this isn't necessarily the person you want to work for anyway, right? You want to work for the good manager who appreciates it. Well, the good manager is already in that organization, perhaps, and sees this happening and knows your manager and knows there's no way that person could have done this. So you must have been the one who did it. And not only did you do it, you were loyal and backed up that manager. The good one's going, wow, I want that person working for me. So it ultimately works out. The people who need to know almost always will know. They'll find out, and you look good in the process. All right, enough horror stories. Let me get to some good stuff, and then I'll get to some practical advice. You ever read any of the Horatio Hornblower novels? These two are a lot of fun. These are great. This is a series of 11 novels by C.S. Forster, who wrote The African Queen, among other things, and they're about a naval officer during the Napoleonic Wars. So we're talking, wooden ships and iron men. We're talking sailing vessels, 1790-something to about 1815 in general. He didn't plan to write 11 novels. He wrote one. and then it was so popular he wrote a sequel and another sequel, and then he went back and wrote some prequels and forward and back all the way. And ultimately, over a 30-year period, there were 11 of them. If you decide to read them, by the way, start with this one. Start with number 2, Lieutenant Hornblower. That's my favorite in the whole series. And you don't need the one that came before it because it was written afterward anyway. Okay? And then, by the way, there's also a mutiny in it. Wonderful book. Hornblower succeeds because he guides managers but lets them make the decisions. See, that's an often underrated aspect of our job, especially if our manager is not technical, or if they're formerly technical and not technical anymore. They're going to rely on us to present the alternatives. You let the manager make the decision, but you get to pick the alternatives. You get to present them in the way that you think is best, and that's a big influence. That gives you a lot of responsibility on all this. He shows respect for the position, if not necessarily for the idiots holding the position. He shares credit for successes with superiors and subordinates wherever possible. Again, the people who need to know will know. And he looks for opportunities to help correct his subordinates' weaknesses. He puts people in, when the crisis is not going on, he has different people doing different jobs that they're not necessarily as good at. He's running drills constantly so that when the crisis happens, everybody's ready to go. But of course, in the crisis, everybody's in the best place at the best time to succeed. Now, I want to talk about communication for a minute, because a lot of this, beyond the loyalty part, comes down to how do you communicate with a manager. And to do that, I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to talk about one of these personality typing systems, but I don't want to oversell it. A lot of these systems are used, or should I say misused, within organizations, and they'll go through a fad and they'll say, oh, we're going to get everybody tested and this will help us understand how to communicate better. And if they left it at that, it probably worked pretty well. But I want to show you something about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I see a lot of chuckles. The fad that goes through business periodically. I'm not going to get down into the deep details of it. It's fun if you want to read about it. It's kind of amusing, you know. But there are certain aspects of this that have made a big influence on my career, and that's what I want to focus on. Now, the Myers-Briggs type indicator talks about preferences. People are far too complicated to be reduced down to a couple of measurements. Anybody can do anything, you know? Anybody can do whatever they need to under certain circumstances. However, when you operate against type, it does cause stress. So it can be awkward, it can be difficult to do long term. It's always good to know someone's preferences, because then you know how they want to be talked to, how you want to communicate with them in a way that's most likely to be heard and understood. So there are 4 scales for this: extroversion and introversion, sensing and intuition, thinking and feeling, and judging and perceiving. And unfortunately, like so many technical fields, the words don't necessarily communicate what they mean. So let me break them down. Extroversion versus introversion has to do with acquiring energy. Do people energize you? Does having people around give you lots of energy, or do people make you tired? You can tell if you're at a conference like this all day long, and then at the end of the day, you get together with your buddies, and they go, hey, that was fun, where are we going for happy hour? That's an extrovert. The introvert's like, are you kidding? I gotta get away from all you people. I'm sick of having people around. I need to recharge. Now, they probably won't say that. Depends on how good a buddy they are. But nevertheless, that's the difference. Now, how do you know if your manager is an extrovert or an introvert, other than the obvious, talking? Because here's part of the problem. Everybody acts more extroverted than they really are, especially at work, because it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. You have to get attention, you have to communicate, you have to take the lead in many cases. And introverts have a difficult time doing this, but they know they have to do it or they won't succeed. So people tend to behave more extroverted than they really are. Your manager always claims to have an open door policy, right? Is the physical door actually open? Now, I don't mean when there's a phone call or a meeting going on, just generically. If you have an extrovert, the door will be open, because if the door is closed, the person feels disconnected from the outside world, and that's draining. Whereas if the door is open, they at least feel connected to what's going on around them, and that they can talk to people. Whereas if the door is closed, it's like, I don't want the distractions. Introverts need time to prepare for interpersonal interactions. Now, I don't want to exaggerate that. It could be a few seconds. It could be a minute. Say you want to have a conversation with your manager about anything, not a major one, just I need to talk to the manager. Do you go down and knock on the door, or do you use whatever the asynchronous communication mechanism is in your organization? An IM, a text message, email, what have you. If the manager's an extrovert and you send them a message, they're like, look, next time just come down and knock on the door. Okay? If they're an introvert, they're like, good. You send them a message, they're like, good, give me a couple minutes to straighten up and then we'll talk. Just again, the natural mechanism. You're not changing what you're saying or even how you're saying it. You're just giving them the time they need to prepare. An extrovert will want to have a meeting, get everybody together, and hash things out. An introvert wants to set up a wiki. Hey, maybe we'd never have to talk to each other again, Sensing versus intuition. This one has to do with how you gain new information. A strong sensing preference. And again, you could be in the middle. You don't have to be an extreme on these things. But a strong sensor has a body of knowledge and then adds to it one fact at a time. Okay, I now know this. I now know that. Now let me step back and see the big picture. An intuitive doesn't have time for step, step, step unless they already see the big picture. If your manager is a strong sensor and you say, hey, I went to this great, wonderful conference, I now want to use, I want to use Bootstrap for my CSS styling or something like that. You don't go in and say to that manager and say, let's talk about computer science from Babbage on down. You don't say, here's the entire world of CSS styling and I have this thing I want to do. No. You go in and you say, you know where we are right now? And here's where I want to be. Step, step, step. That's where I want to go. And when the manager goes, okay, I see. Now, why do you want to do this? See, the same argument, different order. The intuitive, you go into the intuitive managers and say, hey, let's talk about this field and what's going on in it. And now I'd like to actually use this. And get, okay, I get it. What do you want to do? Step, step, step. See? Same argument, different order, based on knowing what your manager's likely to hear. Does your manager tend to focus on the details, the step-by-step implementation details of every project? Now, I'm not talking about when you're under crisis, when the budget is strained and everything. I'm talking about just day to day. Or do they like to look at the big picture? What are we accomplishing here? What is our overall goal? What's our mission? Sensors are managers. Intuitives tend to be more leaders, just in terms of what they focus on, not in terms of their proficiency. You need both in any organization. The worst question a sensor can ask an intuitive, and I know because I worked for a sensor for many years and I tested very high on the intuitive scale, is he would say to me, how did you get that? Whatever it happened to be. Because the worst possible answer I could give him was the truth. Oh, I tried what you suggested, but that didn't seem right, so I pulled in this unrelated thing and mixed that in, and that gave me an idea, and so I threw out the whole thing and wrote it all from scratch using this additional open source project. That is of no help to him at all. That was of no help to the sensor. What the sensor's asking isn't, how did you get that? He was asking, how does he get that? Any connected series of steps from where we started to where we ended is what they want to hear, whether they were used or not. Once I learned this, he would say, how did you get that? And I'd say, oh, okay, you know where we started? Step, 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 there. Oh, okay, did you do that? No. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter. He needs to understand how it works, and then you can step back and talk about the more intuitive parts of the problem. Thinking versus feeling has to do with decision making. Do you make decisions based on logic and consistency and the sheer number of facts, or do you look at your gut reaction? How does this feel? Thinking preferences make decisions based on a scale in their head. Which side has more facts? Obviously, we do that. Anything else would be irrational. It's a sort of thinking conversation. Whereas a person who makes decisions based on feeling preferences has a gut intuition about whether it's a good idea or not. Yeah, the facts may outweigh on this side, but hey, that may change tomorrow. It might not be the right facts for our situation. I need to try it. See, say you decide, oh, hey, I went to Devnexus. I want to try AngularJS or something. If your manager is a thinking preference, they want to see the reasons why this is better than Ember, Knockout, Backbone, Spine, whatever. And you can usually back that up with whatever you want to find. Otherwise, it wouldn't be successful in the first place. If it's a feeling preference, if the manager has a feeling preference, you want to provide a prototype. You want to show them a demo. Hey, let's here's the same problem implemented in Ember and Backbone and Spine. You go to To-Do.js, they have them all worked out like that. And that way they can experience it even virtually, and that helps them make a decision. Sometimes a feeling preference person will have a difficult time making a decision because they may see the facts, but they haven't experienced it, and you can help get them over that hump. Now, the structure one is judging versus perceiving, and again, the words don't fit. The idea behind a judging preference is those are people who like to finish things, whereas a perceiving preference are people who like to start things. A person with a strong judging preference has a clean desk. I had a friend who was a mathematician who his desk was always clean, and I figured that's impossible. And I would say, how do you do that? He says, well, I work on something, and I stop working on that, and I put it away, and I take out the next thing, and then I work on that, and then I put that away. And in my house, every flat surface has piles of paper on it. It drives my wife insane. Judging preferences like to get done. Perceiving preferences are like, oh boy, a new project, a chance to do it right at last. Does your manager, when a new project arises, worry about all the unfinished projects, or do they say, no, we'll find a way to get some funding, we'll free up some time, because this is going to be cool, just because they think that way. Perceiving preferences don't like to finish because they think the next thing's right around the corner. We don't know all the details yet. Now, if you want, you can go to the MBTI site, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. You can look at all the combinations. You can self-diagnose. You can type your spouse. You can type your kids, whatever. And that's fun and interesting, but that's not really what changed my life fundamentally. What changed my situation was a related topic called the Keirsey Temperaments Sorter. This is by a professor by the name of David Keirsey, who took those letters and reduced them down to four two-letter combinations. The SJs, the NTs, the NFs, and the SPs. Now, they actually have names. This is a picture from Wikipedia on the Keirsey Temperament Sorter. Doesn't matter what the actual details are. Don't worry about the words. The colors, the highlighted ones, are the different two-letter combinations. And I want to focus on that. The SJs are called guardians. These are people who have a sensing preference. That means step, 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 combined with a judging preference. Finish, finish, finish. These people are the backbone of any organization, especially hierarchical organizations. Frankly, they're attracted to hierarchical organizations. They like doing that sort of thing. They don't rock the boat, and yet they get things done. Very helpful. SJs love checklists. And the thing that you rapidly realize when you're dealing with an SJ, and this is why you have to know they're SJs, is you must give an SJ a way to check you off. You have to. They can't think unless they can check you off. For example, here comes a new directive down from Human Resources to a manager. Hey, I need all your employees to fill out this stupid form. They don't call it a stupid form, but it's a stupid form. The manager goes, oh, great, all right, sends it out to all the direct reports. Hey, I need you to fill out this form. Now, you get this form to deal with. You glance at it, you go, oh, man, this is painful, it's complicated. I don't even know the answer to some of these. I'll put it aside. Because here's the stuff you're working on now. There's the stuff that needs to get done. There's the stuff you'd like to do. And somewhere below the floor is that form, right? So you ignore it until a week later the manager's going to come by. That's the opposite of what you could do. What you can do, what you need to try to do, set a timer, 10 minutes, tops. Fill out the form. If you don't know an answer, leave it blank. Make something up. We're not talking about legal requirements. We're talking about a stupid form from HR, right? But here's the key. Submit it. Week goes by. Here comes your manager. Hey, I really need you to fill out that form. Oh, I did it right away. Really? I mean, listen to what you just said. You just told the manager, I heard you, and I did something you know I didn't want to do, but I did it right away. Wow, what'd you put for number 4? Oh, I left that blank. I don't think you can do that. Do you want me to get it back? No, that's unchecking a checkbox, right? No way they're going to want that. Okay, so the form comes back from HR. No, I need an answer for number 4. Fine, timer, 5 minutes this time. Put something in. Whatever you have to do. Submit it again. You will outlast these people, I promise you. It's passive aggression for the win, but it does work, okay? But you have to give an SJ a way to check you off. You will not win a battle with an SJ because you refuse to fill out paperwork. It's not going to happen. Now, if it's not an SJ, you might have a chance. But SJs will not even think until that checkbox is checked. But it doesn't have to be the way it says it on the form. They just have to be able to rationalize, yeah, I checked it off. That's all that has to happen. Now, the NTs are the rationals. These are intuitive thinkers, big picture and logic processing. These are your architects, right? These are the ones who see this form come down and go, not how do I change my day-to-day life? They think we should build a system so that everyone can complete this in an optimal, efficient fashion, okay? That's an NT. And if you know they're NTs, it helps you understand where they're going to be going with these sorts of things. Now, the NFs are called idealists, intuitive with a feeling preference. These are the people, when the form comes in, they don't go, how do I change my day-to-day operation? They don't go, let's build a system. They go, what in the world triggered this? Who did something wrong? Okay? Who was affected by this? They think in terms of the people and always special circumstances. An NF manager will be acutely sensitive to interpersonal conflicts on the team. They will be very aware of it, and they will try to take steps to fix it. An SJ manager will be like, I don't want to hear about that. Come in, do your job, go home. What's the problem? Okay? Now, again, I'm choosing an extreme case, but that's the basic way of thinking. Now, NFs are called idealists for a reason. An NF has to feel that what they're doing is important, or you may not be able to get them to do anything. If they feel inspired, or if there's at least the promise of an inspiration later, they'll be highly motivated. And if they feel like, I'm making one more widget for the company, I just don't care, you're going to have a tough time getting them to move, both on the employee side and the manager side. The last one is the SPs, the artisans as they're called. These people live in the moment. Jazz musicians are often SPs, professional athletes especially. They're not common in business. They're not attracted to businesses. They're not attracted to hierarchical organizations. The exception might be certain salespeople, especially if the sales cycle is very short, okay, because then they have the constant interaction and the constant feedback, and they like that. My boy's an SP, okay, my son is an SP. Now, before you go typing your children, let me warn you, all kids test out as SPs below a certain age, okay? The classic, I hate you, I never want to speak to you again, but first could you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? That's an SP, okay? My boy is 22 now. I know he's an SP, and he's got a good job, and I'll say to him something like, so what's your plan for your career? What's the next step? How's this going to work? And he will give me an answer because society has trained him that he has to have an answer. For my part, I know not to put any weight in that answer at all. It'll be completely different tomorrow. I mean, it's almost like if I said, what are you going to do tonight? I don't know, something will turn up. That's an SP. You won't run into that many of them in IT necessarily, okay? So there's your four categories, the SJs, the NTs, the NFs, and the SPs. And if you can figure out which role your manager is in, you know much better how to approach them and how to communicate with them. Again, I'm not telling you to change any of your arguments, but you may structure them differently or have them in a different order based on the personality type of your manager. And again, these are not necessarily, these are extremes. They may not fit that category quite like that, but at least it gives you a sense of what's going on, and awareness is half the battle on this stuff. Okay, enough of that. Let me give you a few concrete pieces of advice. I'm calling them constructive loyalty how-tos, if you will. I've got a list here, but let me just go through them. The first one is something that was very hard for me to learn, and I still in my heart have trouble believing it. When you come up through our highly dysfunctional academic institutions, you find out that when someone asks you a question, they not only have an answer in mind, the right answer, they know how they want you to say it too. You've got to say what they want to hear in the way they want to hear it. I always call this the game of school, as opposed to actually learning something, okay? You have to know how to hit the tape recorder and play it the way they want to hear it so that they're happy. When you get into the business world, everything is different. When someone asks you a question in the business world, they don't know the answer. In fact, they're stuck. I'm trying to do something. I hit this stumbling block. I go, geez, I don't know. Who can I ask? Oh, I'll ask this person the question. What do you think? Now, say your manager does this. They're stuck, and they send you a message and say, hey, I need to know this. Now, again, our inclination as technical people is to want to give the right answer, the perfect answer, and most of the time we don't even know that right away, so we do one of two things. We put it aside and say, I got to finish this and I'll get to it, or you go, all right, let me put all my work aside for the moment and spend 3 days digging into this. The manager comes by and it's like, I asked you that question. What happened? Oh, I'm working on it. No, I didn't mean for you to do that. What you find out in business is a good answer today is much, much better than a great answer next week. It's hard to believe, especially if you have perfectionist tendencies, as most of us do. But a good answer is a good enough answer in business because the person was stuck. So what happens? The manager sends you a question. Well, here, think of it this way. You send an email to a buddy because you're stuck. You say, to a friend that you have, hey, I need an answer to this question. And you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you're not getting an answer back, and you're getting madder and madder and madder. Then you run into that person in the hallway, hey, why didn't you answer my email? Oh, I've got 7,000 unread emails. I don't care, why didn't you answer my email? Now you may not say it, but you're thinking it. Imagine how much worse that is coming from your boss. The manager's like, I asked you a question, so what do? You go, all right, here's the email. I don't know, but this is what I've seen, this is what I'm aware of, here's a couple links, and then the question, do you want me to put everything aside and look into it? 9 times out of 10 or more, the answer is like, that's all I needed, I'm good. And you responded right away, and you cleared it off your plate. It's huge. A related concept is emails again. Answer emails, especially those from your manager, as soon as physically possible. Now, add whatever caveats you need. If the answer is, I don't know, that's an answer, but at least address it. Yes, okay, let me give you an answer here. I'll put in all these hedges, and it's in the email. Do you want me to take the time to find out? And believe me, that's enormously valuable to the manager. That's active, constructive loyalty. And again, most of the time, then you cleared it from your plate. You don't have to deal with it again. You don't have to work on it. Of course, if they ask you, no, I really do need you to look into this, well, then you know that too. And that's valuable. It's valuable to have that information. So the best you can, you try to communicate right away. Answering emails demonstrates loyalty in a very active way. One last thing on that. I teach software development training classes for a living. That's mostly what I do. Things related to Java, Android, Spring, Hibernate, Groovy, Grails, etc. Many of the companies I work for send me emails to ask questions, and I will always respond as soon as physically possible, as soon as I possibly can. They will often offer me opportunities because they know I'll answer. Even if the answer is, I got to check with another client, I don't know if that week is open, I need to customize this, fine, but they know they'll get an answer. The people they don't want to work with are the ones who they don't hear back from right away. Every once in a while I'll get burned. This isn't perfect. Every once in a while I'll make a decision while the situation's still evolving, and that's a problem. But the wins way exceed the number of problems I've ever encountered. Okay, this one my son has not learned, and it's going to be painful when he learns it. Your boss is not your friend. It's hard because we want to be friends, and if you watch television, every office environment on TV winds up with everybody lifelong friends. And of course, it's not realistic at all. Your office mates are not your family. Your boss is not your friend. This is a professional business relationship. If you think your manager is your friend, then the first time he or she makes a decision that hurts you, you're going to be surprised and you're going to be hurt. And you need the emotional distance to be able to, if you will, manage that. You need to have the professional relationship to work together when you're in the overlap. So when one of those times that isn't in the overlap occurs, you're like, okay, I understand. Because if your friend does this to you, you're surprised and you're mad. Hey, I thought you were my friend. Now, on the other hand, your boss is not your enemy either. It may seem like it at times, and I'll be honest, if your boss is your enemy, it's time to move on, okay? You can't fix that. But in general, when your manager does something against you, it's not because they're out to get you. It is not in your manager's best interest to see you fail. Many of you have been through hiring committees before. Replacing people is very difficult and very expensive. It's time-consuming, it's frustrating, and there are huge error bars involved. You'll hire people that you'll go a week later, how could we not have seen this? How did we not know? Well, next time I'm asking this question. I'm saying no to this person during the interview because I want to see how they react to the word no. I had no idea they'd go nuclear the first time they heard it. Okay? It's very hard to do this. And if a person leaves a manager, the boss's boss is going to be upset. They're like, wait a minute, what happened? Why did they leave? Why didn't you fix this? What are we going to do about their projects? How are we going to go about hiring? It always makes the manager look bad when that occurs. So it is not in their best interest to have you fail. Now, this was one of my favorites, and I wish I knew where I found this. I love to believe I made it up, but I can't take credit for this. The best way to tell your boss or anybody, frankly, that he or she is completely wrong is the phrase, "That turns out not to be the case." It's gorgeous. I mean, listen to what that says. That says, "I heard you, I understood you, I applied it to our situation, and it doesn't fit." It doesn't say, "I think you should sell everything you own and put a down payment on a clue." Not quite so diplomatic, okay? That turns out not to be the case. You could throw in, "I can see why you might think that." Try not to roll your eyes. Okay? But that turns out not to be the case. I mean, I've told people this, and I've had them say it back to me, and I'm like, okay with it. It doesn't hurt. Really very good. If you don't remember anything else from this talk, remember that one, okay? So, in summary, you never want to make your manager look bad, even in the organization. You don't want to violate the chain of command. I didn't have time to talk about that, but that's also a major issue. You never trash your manager on social media. Now, that's not a problem any of us are likely to have, but the kids today who are growing up with always venting their feelings on social media. They're going to have to learn control. I often said to my son, maturity is measured by the things that you think of that are funny that you don't say. Okay? So they're going to have to learn how to filter. Of course, you also don't even trash your manager within the organization, even if they do something you're mad about. Again, the constructive loyalty has to be there. They have to believe that you have their back. What do? Try to respond immediately. Now, some managers have boundary issues, right? You'll be out with your family on the weekend and you get a text message from the boss with a question. Again, respond. But the response can be, "Hey, I'm out with my family. I don't really know that. Can I get back to you Monday morning?" That's usually enough. Now, if it's not enough, again, you needed to know that. Okay, then you have information. But just the quick response, and I guess I'm going to have to train my manager about boundaries, but that's part of the process, see? Share credit wherever you can, because the people who know will appreciate it, and the people who you want to work for are going to enormously value that because they want to be part of this. Everybody wants a part of success. Negotiate privately when you're unhappy. Go in, shut the door, and explain, but then let it go. Once you've negotiated, whenever they make the decision, so be it. Determine your manager's type so that you can figure out what they want, and above all, remember, that turns out not to be the case, especially if you disagree with everything I've said. Okay? So, enjoy the conference. Thank you very much for coming. Have a good time. Thank you.